The planet of the sword. There was a planet far away from Earth, a planet with no name. Its skies were always gray, and the ground was full of dust and sharp black rocks. In the middle of that strange land, there stood something ancient, something powerful. It was a sword. The sword stood tall, stuck in a stone platform in the middle of a large open circle. Around it, thousands of aliens stood every day. Looking at it, praying to it, they built temples, towers, and even statues around the sword. They called it the Blade of the Gods. But this sword was not just any sword. It was special. For thousands of years, no one had ever been able to lift it. Not one alien, not one warrior, not even the strongest. Creatures in the galaxy, they tried again and again, but the sword never moved. It stayed quiet, waiting. Some aliens believed the sword was a test. Others thought it was cursed. A few even said the sword was alive. They told stories of warriors who touched it and disappeared, some who went mad, and some who died without a single wound. Over time, the aliens stopped trying to lift it. Instead, they began to worship it. The city that grew around the sword was called Salthara, and it became the heart of many alien races. Each race had its own legend about the sword, some said. It was left by the old builders, a race of gods who had vanished. Others said it was a key, a lock, or even a prison, every year. During the red sun's rising, they held a great festival. Warriors from across the stars came to prove their worth. They stood in front of the sword, placed their hands on the hilt, and pushed or pulled with all their strength. But the result was always the same: nothing. The sword never moved. Some fell to their knees in shame. Others cried, a few screamed in anger, but the sword never answered, never reacted, never spoke. The high priests of Salthara believed the sword would choose someone one day. Not just anyone, but the one worthy. They said that when the right soul touched it, the blade would glow, the ground would shake, and the sword would rise like a feather in the wind. They waited for that day, and then, one quiet evening, something strange happened. The sky above the sword changed. Silver light shot across the stars and broke through the clouds. It wasn't a comet. It was a ship, small, old, and earth-made. It flew lower and lower until it landed just outside the city walls. The aliens ran to see it, confused and afraid. No one had seen a ship like that before, and no one had seen a creature like the one who stepped out. He was tall, but not huge. His skin was soft, not scaled. His eyes were bright, and his walk was slow, calm. He carried no weapon, only a backpack and a jacket full of dust. His name was Jackson Cole, and he was a human from Earth. But Jackson didn't know anything about the sword. He didn't know about the city, the legends, or the danger. His ship had been hit by an asteroid, and he had crash-landed. He was just looking for help. When the aliens saw him, they froze. Some whispered, others shouted. The priests came out of the temples and looked at Jackson with wide eyes. They didn't know what to do. No human had ever been here before. Jackson looked around, confused. He saw the sword in the center of the stone ring and walked closer. The aliens gasped. The guards reached for their weapons, but the high priest raised his hand and stopped them. "Let him," the old alien said. "Let him try." Jackson stood in front of the sword. He didn't know why, but he felt something, like a soft pull in his chest. He stepped up onto the stone platform and slowly reached out his hand. The aliens held their breath. His fingers touched the hilt. Nothing happened. No lights, no fire, no sound, but also no pain, no death, no curse. Jackson pulled gently, but the sword didn't move. He let go, stepped back, and scratched his head. "Weird," he said softly. The high priest looked at the others and whispered. He touched it and lived. For the first time in 1,000 years, someone touched the blade. And the blade did not punish him. It did not reject him. It simply waited. The city began to buzz with fear and wonder. Who was this human? Why didn't the sword hurt him? Did it mean? And somewhere deep below the stone platform, far beneath the surface of the planet, something began to wake up. Something that had been asleep for a very long time. Something that had been waiting. Not for aliens, not for warriors, but for a human. The human arrives Jackson Cole had never meant to become part of a legend. He was just a space explorer from Earth, traveling alone, charting lost sectors. His mission was peaceful exploration, data collection, maybe a few samples, but fate, as always, had other plans when his ship crashed on the dusty surface of the alien world. Jackson thought it was just another bad day. He stepped out of the damaged vessel, holding his breath, scanning the terrain. The land was quiet, dry, and filled with black stones. He had no idea he had landed on Salthara, the planet of the sword. He took a few cautious steps. His boots crunching on gravel, his radio was dead, his maps were blank. And his ship wouldn't fly again unless he found fuel or help. He was tired, low on supplies, and completely unaware that hundreds of alien eyes were watching him from the city towers, temples, and shadowed caves. Alien citizens stared. They had seen many things in their lifetime: firestorms, void beasts, battles in the sky, but never had they seen a creature like him. Tall, but not powerful looking, Jackson seemed soft, no armor, no weapons, no glowing eyes or cyber parts. He looked like a mistake, like something that did not belong in a place full of warriors and legends. Yet he walked forward, slowly, calmly, as if he had walked these lands before. In the Temple of Silence, the high priest stood before a glass orb. It showed Jackson's every move. The priest's voice cracked as he spoke. "He is human," gasps filled the room. Some elders stepped back in fear. Others leaned forward in awe. "The prophecy speaks of the one from the blue world," a priestess whispered. "Perhaps it is just a traveler," said another. "He does not even know where he is." But the sword allowed him to touch it. The elder snapped. "That has never happened before." As Jackson approached the circle of stone, the crowd grew restless. He saw the sword standing in the center, glowing faintly. He thought it was art, or maybe a weapon left behind by an old civilization. He didn't know its power, its history, or the weight it carried in alien hearts. Without fear, he stepped up onto the stone ring. The guards tensed, fingers on triggers. The priests watched without blinking. He stood before the sword again. Its long blade stuck deep in the ancient platform. It looked old, and yet untouched by time. As if it waited, Jackson placed one hand on the hilt and gently tried to lift it again. Nothing happened. It stayed still, heavy as ever. He laughed a little. "Just a big rock," he said to himself. But the aliens were not laughing. The sword had not rejected him, not burned him, not pushed him away. That alone was enough to terrify them. Jackson turned to leave when a voice called out from behind, "Wait." He looked back. A young alien stepped forward from the crowd. Not a warrior, but a child. She had green skin and glowing yellow eyes. Her name was Laika, and she had seen something the others had not. "You're not afraid?" she said softly. Jackson smiled. "Should I be?" Laika looked at the blade, then at him. "Everyone who touches the sword feels fear." "You didn't?" Jackson shrugged. "Maybe I'm too dumb to be afraid." The alien girl tilted her head. "Or maybe you're different." The high priest stepped forward now, his long robes dragging through the dust. "Come with me, human," he said. Jackson looked around. Is that a request or a command? The old priest gave a tired smile. "It is both." They led Jackson through the city. Past strange buildings and alien art, he saw statues of the sword, songs written on walls, and glowing crystals that told stories in light. The entire culture was built around that one sword. In the temple, Jackson was shown old carvings, They told of an ancient weapon made by beings older than time. The sword was not just steel, it was alive. It could judge, and it waited for a soul that was pure, selfless, and strong, but not in muscle. In spirit, it waited for the one worthy. You believe? That's me. Jackson asked, confused. We don't know, the priest answered. But you were not rejected. That has never happened before. Jackson leaned on a stone pillar. I'm just an explorer. I'm not special. The priest's voice grew low. Sometimes, those who do not seek greatness find it anyway. That night, Jackson stayed in the temple. Under watch, but not as a prisoner, the city buzzed with rumors. Some feared him. Others worshipped him. A few wanted him gone. Far in the dark corners of Southera, whispers began to spread. Not all aliens believed in the prophecy. Some saw the sword as power, not destiny, and they didn't want a human to take it. As Jackson slept, the sword began to hum softly, unseen by others. Its glow brightened for a second, then faded. Something inside it had changed. It had felt the human's touch, and it remembered secrets in the stone. The next morning, Jackson Cole woke up inside the Temple of Silence. The walls around him were covered in glowing alien symbols. They pulsed softly, like a slow heartbeat, outside. The city of Southera was alive with rumors. For the first time in thousands of years, the sword had been touched. Hand had allowed it. Jackson rubbed his eyes. He still didn't understand why everyone was staring at him. To him, the sword had been just a strange object. He didn't feel chosen. He didn't feel special. He just felt tired. He stepped outside into the warm morning light, and the alien childlike was waiting for him. Her bright yellow eyes sparkled with excitement. You're awake. The priests want to show you something. Jackson followed her through narrow pathways and deep tunnels beneath the temple. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The stone walls began to change. They no longer looked like rough rock. They were smooth, shining, covered in glowing blue lines like veins. This place is older than the city, Laika whispered, older than even the sword. They reached a wide chamber at the bottom. A group of alien priests were already there. Waiting in the center of the room was a large, round door made of silver metal. It had no handles, no hinges, and no seams. Just a glowing circle in the middle. We call this the Heart Gate, said the high priest. It has been sealed for over 10,000 years. Jackson frowned. So why bring me here? The priest pointed to the glowing circle. Because last night, it started to pulse after you touched the sword. Jackson stepped closer. You think I can open it? We don't know, the priest admitted. But we believe the sword and this gate are connected. Jackson placed his palm on the glowing circle. Nothing happened at first, but then, slowly, the circle brightened under his hand. The metal door let out a low hum, deep, ancient, like a voice half asleep. And then, with a soft click, the door opened. Dust rushed out as the air inside escaped. Beyond the gate was a long hallway lit by crystals. The floor was made of glass, and below, its strange symbols floated in the air like mist. Jackson walked forward slowly. The priests followed, whispering prayers. At the end of the hallway was a large chamber with a dome ceiling. In the center stood a stone pillar with something floating above it. A cube, small, black, and glowing faintly. Jackson reached out, and the cube moved toward him like it recognized him. When he touched it, images exploded in his mind. Not pain, but memories. Not his, but someone else's. He saw visions of tall, golden-skinned beings with 6 fingers and bright blue eyes. They walked through stars, building weapons, ships, and temples. They were called the Varellan, and they were the ones who forged the sword. The cube whispered in his head, not in words, but in emotions, pictures, and sound. It told him the sword was not just a weapon, it was a key. A key to awaken something powerful, something sleeping inside the planet itself. the Vorlon had hidden. The sword long ago, after a great war. They believed only a being with true balance, a heart that knew pain. Hope, sacrifice, and peace. Unlock the weapon and what lay beneath it. Jackson stumbled back as the cube dropped from his hand. The vision ended. He gasped for air. Laika looked at him, eyes wide. What did you see? I saw the ones who built the sword, Jackson whispered. They weren't gods. They were people like us, but different. The high priest knelt before the cube. The gate would only open for you. This proves it. You are part of the sword's path. Jackson shook his head. But I'm not a warrior. I'm just an explorer. The priest's voice was quiet. Perhaps that is why the sword has chosen you. Warriors have strength, but not always peace. You carry both as they return to the surface. Dark clouds began to gather above the city. The wind howled across the stone towers. And the glowing sword in the center of Salthera began to pulse softly with blue light. Something inside it had awakened, but not everyone was happy, far from the temple. In the shadowy parts of the city, a group of alien warlords gathered in secret. They wore armor made from bone and metal, and their eyes burned with anger. The sword is not meant for an outsider, growled one. We have waited for centuries. This human will not take what is ours. We must act before the priest's hand over the city, said another, before the blade bows to him. A plan began to form. A silent war was coming, back in the temple. Jackson stood once more in front of the sword. This time, it glowed. Brighter when he stepped near, it was responding not to power. Not to blood, but to truth. It had waited for someone like him. Someone who never wanted to be a hero. Someone who carried pain, and yet still moved forward. The sword was watching. The planet was waking, and deep underground, something old. Something dangerous. It's beginning to stir. Trials of the worthy. The sword no longer slept. Ever since Jackson touched it, the blade had begun to glow with soft blue light each night. As if it was breathing, as if it was alive. The priests of Salthera watched it carefully, whispering prayers. And studying the changes, they had waited so long for a sign. And now the sign had arrived. But Jackson felt no joy, only confusion. I don't understand, he told the high priest, standing beside the sword. Why me? Why now? The old alien looked at him with calm eyes. Because you are not like the others. All the warriors who came before wanted power. They wanted to be heroes. You only want answers. Jackson shook his head. But I'm not brave. I'm not wise. I've made mistakes. I've lost people. I've failed missions. The priest placed a hand on the sword's platform. That is exactly why the blade is listening. It does not need perfection. It seeks truth. Later that night, the stars above Salthera vanished. A thick fog rolled in from the edge of the world. And the moonlight turned cold and pale. Jackson stood alone in the circle of the sword, waiting. He had agreed to face the trials of the worthy. No one knew what the trials were, not even the priests. They only knew that once the sword accepted someone, it would begin to test them, not with weapons or enemies, but with something much deeper. As Jackson placed both hands on the hilt, the world around him faded away. The ground vanished. The air disappeared. And a strange silence swallowed everything. He opened his eyes, and he was no longer on the planet. He stood inside a large, empty room, white and endless. And then he heard a voice. His own voice. Why did you leave her? It asked. Jackson turned, and there she was, Mara, his younger sister, standing exactly as he remembered her from the day he left Earth. Her eyes were filled with tears. Just like they had been that day, she had begged him not to go on that final mission. You promised you'd be home for my birthday, she said. Jackson's heart twisted. I had to go. I thought it was safe. But you always choose space over me, the vision said. You always run from people who love you, Jackson. Dropped to his knees. I didn't mean to, he whispered. I didn't know how to be both an explorer and a brother. Suddenly, the room cracked like glass and shattered. He now stood in a different place, a burned-out spaceship. Alarms blaring, metal torn open, and in front of him lay Captain Ezra. His old friend and commander, dying. You gave the order to turn back. Ezra coughed. You saved yourself, not me. Jackson's hands shook. He remembered this day clearly. Ezra had been injured during a mission gone wrong. Jackson had. To choose save the crew or turn back for Ezra, he chose the crew, and Ezra died. You abandoned me, the ghost of Ezra said. You think the sword wants someone like you? Jackson cried out, I tried my best. I didn't want to leave you behind. The walls of the ship exploded into fire, and then vanished. Now he stood in complete darkness. And then one final vision, he saw himself, standing face to face with his own body, but this version of Jackson had burning red eyes and a cruel smile. You think you're worthy. The dark version said, you're full of guilt, fear, and weakness. You're no hero. You're a coward with regrets. Jackson stared into his own face, breathing hard. Maybe I am weak. Maybe I have made mistakes, he said. But I'm still standing, and I won't run from who I am anymore. The dark version screamed, and the room filled with light. When Jackson opened his eyes again, he was back in the circle of the sword, lying on the stone floor, covered in sweat, shaking. But alive, the priests rushed to him, and Laika held his hand. You were gone for hours, she said. We thought you had died. It felt like days, Jackson said softly. The sword showed me everything I've tried to forget, and you faced it, the high priest said. That is the true trial, not the sword, but yourself. As Jackson stood, the sword began to glow again, brighter than before. A soft hum filled the air, and small blue sparks danced around it like fireflies. The aliens stepped back in awe. It had begun to accept him, but not everyone was pleased in the shadows beyond. The temple, the warlords who feared the prophecy, grew restless. We must stop him before the sword fully bonds, said one. If it accepts him, it will obey him, and we will lose everything. They sent assassins in the night, silent and fast. But the sword's glow alerted the priests. The temple guards fought back, and the human was protected for now. But the danger was growing. The trials were not over. That night, Jackson sat beside the sword, looking at the stars. He had passed the first test, but he could feel something deeper coming. Something stronger, darker, and ancient, far beneath the stone, under the city of South Era. The planet itself was changing. Strange quakes began to shake the temples, glowing. Cracks opened in the earth, and from deep underground, a sound began to rise, a heartbeat. Slow, deep, and alive. The sword was not just a key, it was a warning. The alien rebellion, the sword, had begun to change, and so had the city, South Ara. Once a place of worship and quiet fear, now felt like a pot ready to boil. The air was heavy, the ground rumbled softly, and the people whispered more than they spoke. Some were hopeful, believing the prophecy was finally coming true. Others, especially those in power, were afraid. And when people in power feel fear, they turn it into violence. The warlords of Salthara had always ruled from the shadows. They were old families, warriors from long before the temples were built. They had kept peace through fear, silence, and control. The sword had never moved for them, but they had never needed it to. Power was already theirs, but now everything was changing. A human had come, a quiet man, not a warrior, not a leader, not one of them, and the sword responded to him. It glows when he walks near, spat Lord Venkar, the largest of the warlords. The people are starting to believe in him. They call him the Chosen, said another. The sword lights only for him none of us, Then we must take the sword, Venkar growled. Before it's too late, that night, as Jackson sat beside the glowing sword, deep in thought, shadows moved silently through the outer city. Warriors in dark armor climbed temple. Walls, silent as smoke, their eyes burned with hate, not fear. Laika, the small alien girl who had guided Jackson since day one, felt something was wrong. She ran to the priest chambers, breathless. There's movement near the walls, she whispered. Something's coming. The high priest's face turned pale. The warlords have made their move within minutes. The temple was under attack. Explosions echoed through the stone halls, and fire lit the night sky. Warriors stormed the gates, shouting curses, tearing down banners of peace. The people screamed and ran. Hiding in the deep tunnels, the sword stood still, silent, watching. Jackson rushed into the center as the temple burned around him. What do they want? He shouted. They want to stop the prophecy, the high priest said, blood on his robes. They fear what you are becoming. I'm not becoming anything. Jackson yelled. I never asked for this. The priest grabbed his shoulder, eyes burning with truth. You don't choose destiny, human, sometimes. Destiny chooses you. The battle raged for hours, but Jackson didn't fight with weapons. He didn't carry a gun, didn't wear armor. Instead, he moved through the fire, helping the injured alien civilians, temple guards, even an attacker who had fallen from a high wall. He pulled people from rubble, covered children with his coat, dragged the wounded to safety, and as he did, the sword glowed brighter and brighter, high above the city. Alien warships began to circle the temple, preparing to destroy what was left. The warlords would not stop until the sword was theirs or broken, but something strange began to happen. The blade began to hum, not loud but steady, like a living song. The stone platform cracked, and blue light spread out like veins across the ground. The earth shook not from bombs, but from power. The warlords paused in fear as the light reached their feet, climbing their boots like vines of energy. Jackson stood now in the very center of the chaos, and the sword pulsed with a deep, glowing rhythm. It had seen his actions, his compassion, his sacrifice, his refusal to strike back with hate. And it responded. Without warning, the sword rose. Not completely, just an inch, but enough. The stone broke, and a wave of light knocked the attackers to the ground, not harming them, but stopping them cold. Every alien warlord or priest, soldier, or child looked toward the platform and saw what no one had ever seen in all of history. The sword had moved by its own will, and only for the human. Lord Venkar roared in rage and charged toward Jackson with a blade of his own. You are not worthy. He screamed, you are a mistake. Jackson didn't move, didn't raise a hand, but the sword did. It lifted higher, slowly, and a shockwave of energy shot out, lifting Venkar into the air and tossing him backward like a leaf in a storm. His weapon shattered on the ground. Silence fell over the battlefield. Smoke hung in the air. Glowing blue from the sword's light, no one moved, no one breathed. Jackson looked around, his face full of confusion, pain and awe. I didn't ask. For this, he whispered again. The high priest stepped forward, hands shaking. That's why it chose you. In the days that followed, Salfara began to change again. The warlords were gone, some fled, some captured, a few still missing. The city was rebuilt slowly, and the people began to gather around the temple, not just to worship, but to listen. Jackson became a symbol not of war or strength but of peace. He taught the people how to repair, how to heal, how to share stories from Earth about courage, mistakes, and forgiveness. He never claimed power. He never gave orders. He only stayed near the sword, quietly watching it, feeling the hum in his chest each time it pulsed. And then, one night it spoke, not with words, but with light and warmth. A vision came showing Jackson the core of the planet. A deep place where something ancient slept beneath stone and time. Not a machine, not a monster, but a guardian one built by the Verulam to protect the galaxy from a coming darkness. It had been sealed long ago, and only the sword could unlock. Jackson woke with a gasp. "It's not over," he said. "It's only just beginning." The sword was not a prize, it was a key, and the true trial was still waiting far below. The lift the wind had changed every night since the sword had moved. The skies above Salthara had grown stranger. The stars seemed to spin slower. The clouds held their shape too long, and the moon glowed with a color no one had seen before. Blue and gold, like fire and ice together, the people of the city walked quieter now. They whispered less and watched the temple more. They knew something was coming. They didn't know what, but they felt it in their bones. So did Jackson Cole. He stood beside the ancient blade, staring at it for hours. It stood upright as always, tall and silent, but now it hummed softly whenever he got close. It pulsed like a heartbeat. And he could feel it in his chest, like it was breathing with him. He had passed the trials. He had survived the warlord's attack. He had healed the city, brought people together, even when he was unsure of himself. And now, there was only one thing left: the lift on the morning of the final day. The high priest gathered the people in the circle of the sword. The wide stone plaza was packed with every kind of alien from the nearby systems, some with 4 arms, some with wings, some with fur or scales, but all silent, all watching. Jackson stepped forward slowly, wearing the same clothes he had arrived in. Dusty and torn, but still holding together, he wasn't dressed like a champion. He didn't look like a chosen one, but he didn't need to. He had become something more powerful than a hero. He had become trusted. Laika, the small alien child, stood at the edge of the ring, whispering a soft prayer. Her voice trembled with hope. "Please, sword, if he is the one, let him lift you." Jackson placed one hand on the hilt. A wave of light spread across the stone. The crowd gasped, but no one moved. He took a deep breath, then placed his other hand on the sword. The humming grew louder, more alive. The sword was waking up. Jackson pulled, and for a second, nothing happened. But then a sound like thunder rolled through the earth. The sword began to rise, slowly, smoothly, without resistance, as if it had waited forever for this moment. The stone cracked and crumbled as the blade lifted free. The energy from the sword burst into the sky like a beam of light, shooting into the clouds and far beyond the planet's atmosphere. Everyone fell to their knees, not in fear, but in awe. He had done it. The human had lifted the unliftable sword. The sword floated just above Jackson's hand now, glowing with a deep blue flame. Its shape had changed. It was longer, thinner, lighter. No longer a tool of war. It looked elegant, like it was made of starlight and steel. Then, the ground beneath the platform began to tremble. The cracks widened, and the center of the plaza opened like a great stone mouth, revealing a spiral stairway made of light. The planet was revealing its true secret. The priests had never seen this chamber, nor had the warlords or any explorer before. The stairway led downward, into the very heart of Salthara. Jackson turned to the high priest. "What is this?" The elder's voice shook. "The final test? The sword has chosen you. But the planet itself must now speak." Jackson nodded and began to descend. The air grew colder with every step. The walls glowed with symbols from the Voralan language, symbols he somehow now understood. The sword had connected with his mind, and it was sharing its memory with him at the bottom of the stairway. He stepped into a massive chamber, miles wide and shaped like the inside of a planet. In the center stood a giant crystal, floating above a deep pit. It pulsed with red light, low, steady, and alive. A voice echoed in his head, not alien, not human, but something older, deeper. You are the one who lifted the blade, it said. Why? Jackson stepped forward, holding the sword low. Not for glory, not for power. I lifted it because someone had to, because the people here were afraid. And I didn't want to see them hurt again. The light from the crystal flickered. Then steadied, you carry pain. The voice said, you carry loss. Yet you choose peace, not vengeance. Jackson looked around the chamber, unsure if he was speaking to a machine, a spirit, or the planet itself. I've made mistakes. He said, I've failed people, but I've also learned that's what makes us human. We grow, we try again. The chamber rumbled softly, not with anger, but with approval. You are worthy, the voice said. Then awaken what sleeps. The sword lifted into the air on its own, spinning slowly, its glow turning from blue to white. Then it fired a beam of light into the heart of the crystal. The chamber exploded with color. Images flashed in Jackson's mind millions of years. Of history, star empires, ancient wars, fallen civilizations. And at the center of it all, the Varelina race of creators, scientists, and guardians. They had built the sword as a key, and hidden deep in the planet was their final creation, a powerful being made of energy and armor, designed to protect worlds from cosmic threats, a guardian, programmed to remain asleep unless awoken by someone truly worthy. Now it was waking. Jackson fell to his knees as the crystal cracked open and a giant figure stepped from the light. It stood over 30 feet tall, glowing with power. Its eyes focused on Jackson and then it knelt, not to serve him, but to stand with him. When Jackson returned to the surface, sword in hand. A glowing titan following behind him, the crowd gasped again, not with fear, but joy. Salthara had changed forever, and Jackson Cole, the lost explorer from Earth, had become something no human had ever been. A chosen one, a symbol of peace, and the first Guardian's companion.